moderating the panel today. My name is Paul Tidwell. I've been with Project 202 for about 6 years, and me being VP of technology is kind of interesting, right? Because I'm sitting here with some people who are at the top of their field in user experience. But I've had the good fortune of working with user experience professionals and kind of that critical intersection of technology and user experience. You can design all day, but you have to put things in the market, and actually getting things to land successfully requires a lot of collaboration. So thanks to our panelists. I'm looking forward to a great conversation. I'm going to let each one of the panelists do a little bit of a quick intro on themselves so you can get to know them. Nobody better to speak about them than themselves.
Can you hear me? My name is Matthew Stevens. I'm the VP of Design at The Zebra. We are an insurance comparison marketplace. Our elevator pitch is Kayak for auto insurance. I've been there for 2 years. My background's in product design. I got my start. I co-founded a company called DeviantArt.com. It's the largest online art community in the world, 26 million users. I think I'm excited to speak about this panel. I'm excited to talk with these guys.
Hey everybody, I'm Mike Blakesley. Spent the better part of my career, around 20 years, working on the client services side between consulting and providing design services for folks. And then about a year and 8 months ago, pretty specific, I guess, I went to lead product team at RetailMeNot, and so up until recently, as of about a week ago, I was the head of design there, and right now I'm in between opportunities.
Hi all, I am Ryan Rumsey. I am the AVP of Experience Strategy at USAA. For those not familiar with USAA, a large insurance financial services company. I should mention I'm not here on behalf of USAA today, so today I'm really going to be speaking just about general subject matter expertise. My career, I have spent, as opposed to maybe both your experiences, a lifelong career inside the enterprise. So really building product design, front-end development teams in organizations where they never were before. And I'm not sure that they knew what they were getting when I got there. So while I'm at USA now, I've worked for Apple, Electronic Arts, Comcast, Nestle, some of the big sort of heavy hitters in that enterprise space. So looking forward to chatting with everybody.
Great. So we'll also reserve some time at the end for Q&A. So write down your questions if you have any, and we'll spend about 15 minutes on that at the end of the session. So moving into 2019, as we kick off this year, what new emphasis do you see around customer experience and CX in these different types of areas? Right, we have enterprise and retail and services and startups. So how are businesses changing the way that they approach CX?
I think one thing that I was seeing in the retail space is definitely an emphasis on customer experience, creating a much more personalized experience. There's definitely a recognition that to try and differentiate and kind of retain customers, users, you have to provide something different. And so personalization, I think, is kind of one of the key areas, and trying to do that as early as possible is one of the key areas in the retail space.
All right, I think many enterprise companies are looking to do this as well, where if you look at sort of the 3 different ways, according to Porter, how to win in the market, differentiation is a big part of that. And in a market where largely price and features are kind of the same, especially in sort of longer tail industries that are just now getting into digital transformation type of stuff, differentiation becomes the key. I think there's been a huge amount of momentum of getting design, experience-led sort of initiatives into companies. And speaking in the enterprise space from my experience, a lot of my peers, and I do sit on Forrester's CX leadership board. We see a lot of momentum of getting these functions into place and then a lot of struggling with then knowing what to do with the functions. To get them properly rooted in, to really drive these sort of market differentiation desires that we have, there's a whole lot of operational and sort of cultural shifts that need to take place to drive it from a motivational poster to really what is behind that motivational poster.
Yeah, I think for us, personalization is a big part of our initiatives for 2019, and part of that is building trust. That's the word that we keep coming back to. I think InsurTech especially, insurance comparison in general, one, not many people know about it as an option. We ask users all the time, how do you shop for car insurance, or how do you shop for insurance? And they'll say the carriers, they'll say USAA, they will get Geico. And making them aware of us is something that we're focusing on. But our competitors are all pretty shady in a lot of ways. There's a lot of lead gen, a lot of give us your information, and you're immediately bombarded with phone calls. And so for us, it keeps coming back to the word trust, and how do we build trust with our users? How do we close this feedback loop, engage with our users, user listening, all these types of things to build trust and build a relationship and have some authentic dialogue with our users.
Great. So it might help level set, since we have so many points of view represented here. How as an organization, I think it'd be great to hear from each of you on this. How as an organization are you defining CX, and kind of what becomes the emphasis there? Because it's a fairly broad space and kind of, I think, probably personalized to each of those types of businesses.
Yeah, I mean, CX to us is the entire journey. It's everything that every interaction a customer has with us. It's how they feel about us as a brand. And for us, 2018 was spent really trying to define what that journey looks like, and what those touch points look like, and how we can really define them. And then this year, it's all around personalization. It's kind of moving forward, extending that life cycle more, right? We don't want to be this transactional business where people come and search for insurance and then buy insurance and leave, and that's it. So how do we extend that life cycle? How do we extend that customer experience?
I'd agree with that. Forrester has a pretty good definition, right? The perceived value that customers have in their interactions with a company. I think when we're now 10 plus, 12 plus years into these information devices that we carry around, that the market has changed quite a bit. And so where the initial perceptions of interactions with a company were more one-on-one, sort of person-to-person, personalization is a desire that many companies, I think, have right now, but how to do so when I can't sit down and have a conversation with you. It presents some interesting paradigm shifts around customer experience itself. I think many companies still define it as customer support. That's where a lot of the origins of this came from. It's also interesting that we're defining it as customer experience, where I think some of the leading companies are just saying experience driven, because employees are just as valuable in that sort of chain, if you will. And talking about personalization, that's a key to retention, development, attraction, all these types of things.
Yeah, and I think picking up on what you said about breaking paradigms, I think for me, a lot of the way that I look at it is that I've seen a lot of organizations talk about customer experience in terms of the customer experience funnel. So it's immediately kind of visualizing this kind of funnel shape, and inherent in that is the idea that you're going to lose people in the process. You start out with a lot, and hopefully you get people to this great relationship at the end that maybe going to end up at customer support. I think the real challenge in front of all of us is being able to think about that customer journey as a line, and trying to think that how do we connect to every single person that comes and be relevant to every single person that comes through that entire journey. So I see it as a big change in the paradigm of minimizing loss and just actually focusing, how do we get everybody through and be relevant for everybody?
It speaks to, I think, a lot of these shifts in the paradigms. I would actually argue where we're going now is beyond omnichannel, beyond a linear path, right? That people can come in from that spider web sort of directions and go out the same way. So it's almost getting into more like if you're a developer, right, object-oriented view on these experiences of there is no one path in, no one path out. It's actually understanding where, say, maybe a majority of things are happening, the frequency and duration upon which those events occur, and just really shifting from, say, an old school process Six Sigma approach to yes/no flowcharts to using data in a different way. I'll make one other point around customer experiences. I think if you look at segments, which aren't personas, let's not get into that argument, but those coming into the market now who are have the ability to acquire, purchase products, services, experiences, have a different set of values, I think, than like most previous generation segments. And you get into things like ethics and accessibility and D&I, diversity and inclusion, which is, no irony is lost on me here as being all guys right now talking about that. But those are the things that are really coming to play when people are looking at their interactions with companies, with brands, and experiences. It's no longer just, say, a price or a feature. That's kind of become democratized.
So with the mention of kind of tearing down omnichannel, so there's no formal channels, and then personalization, kind of the intersection of those two things feels like you're getting highly personalized experiences. So does that lower the bar for creating designed experiences that are perfect at every point by allowing some more kind of organic exploration of those? To maybe put it in an agile framework, I think perfection is a misguided endpoint, end goal. Doesn't happen. There is no perfection. There is really no target state. There's a desire to get further than where you are. If you haven't picked up, I may come from like the scientific method background, that everything is an assumption using data to inform us to get to the next point, especially in a digital environment where it exists, it breathes, these products, these experiences are in the world. And so it's on us to constantly sort of adjust and move, right? But getting back to the point of omnichannel, right? I think, again, you want to use data rather than finding the way. It's to get into more of the 80-20 type rules of setting sort of the pace of where you apply resources because the data is telling you at that time that's the right place.
Yeah, I think, kind of going back to your spider web analogy or metaphor there, that there's lots of different angles, and certainly in the B2C space and in the retail space, I mean, there are lots of different points of that purchasing process that people are using technology, whether it's the researching phase when they're trying to find, a price on a particular item, or, they're actually like at checkout and wanting to, maybe try and save a little money at the end. There's lots of different points along that whole process, and trying to be available in as many of those different tools or resources that people might use along that process, whether it's in a physical location or on their couch in front of Netflix. If you're not there in one of those channels or one of those experiences, you've lost an opportunity to connect with them.
Yeah, that's a great point. For us, from the design side, I think it sort of reminds me of how the shift happened when we kind of started designing for responsive, and we had to be flexible as designers. I think when you get into personalization, making sure that what we're designing is flexible enough that when we do personalize it, it doesn't break. And on the other side, making sure that everyone's in an alignment on all these different channels, having someone that's like a brand manager, defining the voice and tone that you use and how you speak to your customers, and just making sure that you're consistent. That's something that we struggle with, but we strive for, is just consistency across these channels.
What's fascinating in all this is, I think, as we've sat with these media devices in our pockets, is how it's influencing the, say, B2B world or really employee experience. We just have different expectations. Equifax now has, a team dedicated to driving these experiences to keep B2B partners in place, because our sort of personal behavior of having these personalized sort of I control my own destiny kind of environments have now bled into places that you would not traditionally that long ago expect. In many ways, employees are kind of at the head of controlling the market too. If you're in certain functions like design or development, we kind of hold the ball as employees, and we can have choice in the market to sort of drive where it goes, whether or not even they have personalized experiences for your development, for your performance, for your tracks, all these types of things. It's been fun to watch.
So you mentioned employee experience, and that's kind of an evolving term that's becoming more common, but likely not every company has gone down that path yet, right? So, for the value of everyone here, what do you guys see as kind of some basic blocking and tackling that every company should be focused on around the employee experience, right? Where is the bar set for where you've at least got to be?
Yeah, I think for us, we do a number of things in terms of trying to improve the employee experience. We start every design sprint, everything by user testing with our employees. They're the first ones that see the features that we're rolling out. They're the first ones that have a voice on the feedback side. We do employee engagement surveys as well to make sure that their voice is being heard throughout the design process. It's not a perfect system, but it's something that we keep iterating on and making sure that the employee experience is what we focus on first.
Where to start? If you again take the same Forrester type definition of the interactions with a company, I think organizations are doing a wonderful, I see this across with many of my peers, much of what Matthew said, of getting employees engaged, creating communities where they can speak up, having surveys and sort of feedback mechanisms to drive back up. I think a space that still is really yet to be addressed is that employees are largely hired because they bring some type of inherent expertise to a company, right? It's very expensive to recruit and very expensive to onboard. And yet, when many of these inherent experts arrive, they're sort of said, here's your desk, good luck. And their day-to-day is then traversing and spending 2 years getting to know culture and how things work. And I think it's just this untapped market of where we're still in a paradigm of talking about intranets and portals that were first introduced, 20 years ago, if not before that, that are just missing the mark. And that employee experience is beyond just sort of the attitudinal side. It's also about being able to do my job well, of knowing that my job aligns with the values, not just from a culture standpoint, but that the work if I throw something into Jira, that somehow impacts higher up. That yes, I may prioritize user and business goals, but at the end of the day, I also want to know that I have a development track. Where might I be able to go? I think most companies, organizations have tracks of career that are largely to stay in the same organization you're in. So how does a designer become a product leader? How does a designer become a owner of a P&L? How does a developer become a designer? That's where this spider web doesn't exist. But the expectation from that, my interaction with the company, it's all part of it. How many companies are applying the same rigor of business viability to their employees as well? That same type of focus. I think there's a huge space of opportunity here to address.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I would add, I think both these gentlemen covered a lot of really good points. I think maybe the element that I would add to it and stress is, I'm not sure out of the group here how many folks are like managing and have direct reports and have a responsibility of that onboarding process. The personal components is a big part of that. I think, as a manager, immediately blocking out time to set aside one-on-ones to have on a weekly basis, at a minimum, a check-in to see how they're doing professionally and, where they're getting questions and challenges, being able to, understand their career path desires and, what are their personal influences. And then also just helping to sort through it all. There's the Confluences, the Jiras, all these different myriad tools that, once you've been in there for a while, you kind of know how to kind of navigate all those things. But somebody coming on new, really needs to know how to be effective as early as possible with using all those tools. So kind of need a personal guide in that process.
Great. With fixed services and financial services and all these things, the onboarding experience is a point where there's a lot of investment, but rarely do you hear employee onboarding experiences talked about kind of in the same context. So switching gears kind of back to customer experience, do you feel like there's adequate buy-in at the management and senior leadership level for customer experience beyond checking the checkbox of yes, we're doing design? Like how, is there emphasis on integration and kind of like robust governance behind that, like we would treat anything else like marketing?
Yeah, I can start. One of the things that drew me to the Zebra was the fact that it was a design-forward company. Buy-in from the top was super important. It was founded by a designer. We brought in, after our Series B, we brought in the CEO of Kayak, who, same deal, he had that same mentality of, we're a design-focused company. So getting buy-in is very easy. It makes my job a lot easier. There are times where we don't see eye to eye on how we execute on that, but the strategy that I've kind of taken is to tell a story. I find that to be the best way to change people's perspectives on things. So for us, it's showing them a video of one of our users struggling with something that we're talking about, or just having them talk to someone face to face. That's been the most effective strategy for me in terms of getting buy-in.
I think you're gonna. My experience is there's a wide range of. It depends. And if you want to go talk about some of the bigger differences maybe between startup world and enterprise, is one, what is value when it comes to customer experience and buy-in versus what actually happens, when rubber hits the road kind of stuff, what is actually going on. And so I've worked for companies that absolutely leadership speaks to it top of mind. It's spoken about a lot. Whether or not there's the maturity and rigor of operating in that same way is it depends. And that's where you might get in larger companies, organizations that maybe get it more than other organizations. We still have our silos, in many ways. And so I think there is an emphasis. We've seen Apple and our friends at Whirlpool, even Domino's Pizza now, showing these amazing changes that they're able to get through sort of a customer focus, a member focus. So I think there's a lot of people talking about it, no doubt.
Yeah, I think definitely as much as you can do to create opportunities to build that empathy. Some companies have it kind of baked into their process or their culture to go out and experience the product on a regular basis. Sometimes if you maybe don't have that luxury, or there's also times where it's worth kind of getting together as a group and kind of just walking through the entire experience. What is holistically the entire experience look like, and identifying like the paper cuts along the way. Everybody's probably had a paper cut more than once in their life, right? And it's not like a massive wound, but it is super annoying, right? And it affects your day, everything that you do. And when you have paper cuts in your product experience, your customer experience, people feel that, and that becomes part of your brand. So, one way to do that is to identify what are those little paper cuts, those little annoyances that, build on each other and become this really challenging experience. And so that's one way to kind of, expose and kind of build some of that empathy within, leadership teams.
Picking up off of Michael, I think there's a lot of ways that companies do this outside their core product and feature set as well. You have a lot of large companies who have corporate responsibility, philanthropic arms where they're providing that great sort of customer experience to their user base through different means as well. Apple prides itself on being green. I'm a big skier. Taos has just become the first, I'm going to get it totally wrong, but the first like environmentally categorized in a certain way, top to bottom, from their lifts to the snow to the hotels. So it's not just about being on the snow for them, it's about being this whole system of sort of experience focused.
So data would suggest that Gen Z looks at brand personality and loyalty a little differently than prior generations. Can you, each of you, perhaps speak to this kind of generational loyalty and how you're beginning to address that through your CX programs?
Yeah, I mean, I think Gen Z really started this. I think it's kind of going beyond generations now, as more people are coming online and interacting with their brands in different ways. It's really defining who you are, is like what brand do you use, and so it's the biggest way to differentiate yourself as a company. We're B2C and we're a startup, so this is one of our biggest initiatives, is defining the brand was 2018, building the brand is 2019, and yeah, you just have to make it a priority. That's all.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, just kind of speaking in a broader sense about the retail industry, some of that loyalty is not even about the shopping experience. It's more about just the kind of the brand experience where, y'all have seen a lot of the turmoil and challenges that the retail industry has had over the past several years, and continuing to get worse, and especially for a lot of the younger generation, that they're starting to see that there's more of an interest to just come and interact with the brand and have an experience in those retail environments more than actually just trying to buy the product there. They may choose to buy that product later, but that's kind of one way that retail industry is trying to create and generate more loyalty, is by creating opportunities to interact with the brand.
I think the enterprise space is still worried about millennials. Gen Z hasn't really come up yet. What's interesting about the loyalty, though, is I'm not sure everybody's age. I'm not going to ask, but it reminds me of being a kid in the early '80s, and you're talking about Larry Bird and Magic Johnson wearing Converse and Michael Jordan wearing Nike, and Coca-Cola was this massive brand that was just about representing yourself. So, like fashion, maybe this has come to the forefront again. I think there's much of the Gen Z population is also very come more comfortable than previous generations at being sort of public about access to their own life. And so in that, there's this natural kind of collaboration, if you will, of association with brand, association with music, in ways that maybe we had 20, 30 years ago as well. And it's come back now, and now I don't need to be somebody famous to be getting 1 million hits on Instagram because I'm wearing a pair of shoes, right?
So coming back to the kind of operational side of things and takeaways for our audience, how are you at your organizations going about gathering customer insights, or what are some successful applied methodologies you've seen for gathering customer insights, and how is that changing?
Well, I guess I would say A/B testing is still a thing, or should be a thing. I guess I'll kind of just lay it out there of the generative user research, usability testing, like all that stuff is kind of table stakes, and you should definitely be doing that. I think where organizations, product companies are challenged is how to be able to have a A/B testing platform that allows you to do it frequently as possible, as quickly, kind of turnkey as possible, in a way that the data that you're getting back is trustworthy, so that you can be able to do a lot of testing very quickly and see it live in the marketplace. I mean, laboratory environment is great for kind of being directionally attuned to what users are going to need, but when you actually get that out there, especially for a B2C product, A/B testing is huge in terms of being able to get greater confidence that you're hitting the mark.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what we do on the back end of it. I would say on the front end of it, the first thing I did when I came into the Zebra was to build a research team and to get started with some user testing and user interviews, and really start to identify the pain points that our consumers have. That was a big project for us in 2018, was our consumer pain points surveys that we sent out. Just trying to identify kind of where people are struggling, where our opportunities are, and listen to people's stories. I mean, for us, it's a picture's worth 1,000 words. It was just seeing someone complain about insurance, it's so much more impactful for us in terms of how we get feedback.
It's interesting. I think research still has some of the same problems research had many, many years ago. So what I see is a lot of research being done that is sort of easy to operationalize, but still fighting for research resources when you're talking about deep ethnography, deep qualitative feedback. Doing that in parallel, you may be able to kick off with it, but then soon it becomes a, why am I paying for this type of activity? And I think when you get into that type of research, which is absolutely needed, why you do it is not a black and white sort of decision point. You're not going to suddenly make a metric, 80%. You're not going to move your project from yellow to green. The value is not to move those types of operational metrics. The value is that you can see where you might need to go beyond just the now horizon. Again, in enterprise, I see a lot of still struggles of moving from sort of an annual or maybe even quarterly cycle of funding initiatives, so that the game is largely around we have a budget for this year that we should spend that budget this year so we get the same budget next year. Not really around what types of ways are we leveraging that budget to gain insights to actually move the market or change our business model. So it's something that we still haven't really figured out. The value of design becomes, again, this huge conversation. And I would say it largely depends on how you're defining design, because it's as ambiguous as vision or strategy or innovation. It's a noun, it's a verb, It's an organization, it's an industry, it's big D, little d. What do you mean when we're talking about those things?
I think I'll add one more thing. You sparked something for me, Ryan, there, is to say, like, with the usability testing, especially for like moderated sessions, as much as you can kind of socialize that within the organization, I think is a great way to bring awareness to these challenges. I mean, you run the risk of somebody seeing what one person said in one session, and like all of a sudden, they'll have a whole product strategy around it. But I think the payoff, on the other hand, is that people get proximity to the users, they get proximity to the challenges and the problems, and they become part of the kind of the curiosity engine. They're starting to think about, well, why would somebody think about it that way? And then it becomes much more of a team effort to come up with the innovation and the ways to solve these problems. And so just coming up with your list of attendees, the kind of the program for your moderated session, if you can do it in a day, and socializing that out on your Slack channel, having like GoToMeeting or Zoom or whatever tool that you might use for people to kind of join in and conference in and see all that. It's a great way to get everybody in the organization seeing and responding to what users are participating in the design process.
It reminds me of the metrics that we're using still. NPS was developed by Bain Consulting, and we have satisfaction. And these are largely assumptive measures. What might you do in the future? We might do lots of things. Tomer Sharon, if anybody's familiar with Tomer, talks a lot about this. He's worked for Google, for WeWork, and why aren't we measuring like actual NPS? Like, how many times did you recommend this in the last 7 days? Versus, might you recommend it in the future? They're assumptive and they're generalized. They don't really provide a lot of context to what is going on. So then the measure becomes success. If we hit 80% NPS, well, then we're good, right? But it's not really allowing companies to make well-informed decisions on really how to pivot to set the pace and quality of decisions as they need to be made in this sort of environment. And those that are much more mature in that space know where to apply those research capabilities and are using slightly different metrics.
Yeah, so for something as subjective as experience, measurement's inherently difficult, right? So Ryan, you'd mentioned moving towards more like a desirability scorecard or something that might be more meaningful. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this goes back to my days at Apple. This is like 12 years ago, where when I joined, Apple design is well known, right? But I was a lead designer inside of AppleCare. AppleCare is a highly operational organization. They had, I don't know how many, but they had, say, like 15 KPIs with like 25 SPIs, supporting performance indicators that then go into the KPIs. And after 2 years of kind of leaving me alone, all the engineering teams had these metrics that kind of measured their velocity and all these. And so it was not more like an ultimatum, but more of a challenge to say, well, how do you measure what you do? And so it was at that time that I've kind of evolved over the years, is not an attempt to measure desire. I don't think that's possible. And I think that's a dangerous game to play. But when you're talking about desirability, I think you can use similar approaches. And so the scorecard that I had created was using a paradigm that was very familiar to my business owners of a balanced scorecard, but using it from a perspective of how can I have traceability to that core deep research, and actually then put it up so when I speak to the C-suite, I could tell them that they are a 85 on business performance as it relates to the design. This is more like usability, time on task type metrics. I would also measure around technical performance, the user's cognitive ability to understand technically how the software is working for them. We would then get into two other scores that I developed around credibility. How much trust do I have that this is actually going to improve my process? Do I believe this fits in with my other functions? And the last is communication. Everything works great if I know about it. And so it's been a way for me to push back against the sort of 2 or 3 week cycle of sprinting that just seems to add on, never to remove, never to take the time to debug or performance improve. So by using this kind of different type of scorecard approach, which takes a lot of the same paradigms that are known to us, I could go to the C-suite or top of line product leader and say, actually everything's fine, your features are all great, nobody knows about it. Spend the next few weeks working on performance. Let's figure out a different way to get people to be aware that it exists.
Are any of you using other metrics or measurements to know that your CX is working? Might be a stumper.
Yeah, I mean, for us, unfortunately, it's a combination of NPS. We also have a metric called lifetime value of our users. Still trying to work out exactly how we measure that, but really putting a dollar amount to the overall value of our users. And I kind of alluded to it earlier of trying to extend our user life cycle. A big part of that would be to increase the lifetime value of that user, repeat usage, and just people coming back and shopping for either different types of insurance or another policy or different.
Yeah, I think kind of I'll speak in some generalities a little bit, but I think that with experiences that do rely on kind of a very transactional kind of success metric versus where you want to be is something much more around loyalty. Lifetime value is certainly one of those measurements in terms of, are we, building a relationship, and having that richness of the relationship is what you're aiming for. And so lifetime value might be something. If you have an app, maybe it's monthly active users or weekly active users, depending on how frequently you're hoping people are going to be coming back. That's a way to kind of measure, are you getting people to be interested in, are you being relevant to them on a regular basis? And then, at least from kind of like the entry points, what's the bounce rate going to be looking like? Are people kind of coming in and quickly jumping off, or are they actually seeing that, you have something to offer that they're going to spend some time on?
So with some of these metrics and things like generative research and A/B testing, right? Like how do you go about prioritizing where to invest your time, where to point your teams at these kind of critical paths?
Well, I think this is a problem that many teams have because ultimately there's somebody who owns a budget who wants to know where that money is going. It's my belief that we have to be able to talk about business viability from, say, design or even a desirability or feasibility metric. We have to be able to understand how we overlap into viability. So when it comes to prioritizing work, I think it's largely to then get to the goal of what the work is meant to do. So if we're investing in an initiative, is there an intelligent way that we can do some break-even analysis, total economic impact, something else, but using a little bit of math to then say, where really, from a business standpoint, should we prioritize? If the business is owning the overall mission, vision, and strategy for a company, that in order to continue to have users and provide products and experiences for those users, they have to remain in business. I think it's less around the desirability or the feasibility. It all kind of has to roll up and make sure that you can get it done and that it makes sense from a P&L standpoint to resource people, right? Might be a controversial opinion amongst my design leader friends, but This is what years of enterprise has
Well,
done.
I think it's definitely true. Certainly in the consumer space. I think what's interesting though is kind of like a counterpoint is that there might be some times where you don't go into it with the intention of actually showing a profitable outcome, and you get a nice surprise. There was an accessibility change that we made, and the whole point was, hey, we need to do this to be more accessible for people with visual impairment. And surprisingly, in a good way, it actually led to a lot more conversion rate. Which ultimately turned into dollars. So you may actually be surprised if you're doing the right thing and can convert into business value as well.
Yeah, for me, I always come back to the quote of like, what gets measured gets done. So measuring, trying to put a number to what type of impact this is going to have on the business. It's tough. For us, it's a combination of opportunity analysis, research, industry experts. Something that we struggle with at the Zebra is none of us are insurance experts on the design team, right? Well, I mean, we've sort of become insurance experts over the years, but it's not something that's required to hire to join our team. And so a lot of it is really getting other stakeholders involved and helping us make the case for a feature or for a new product, or you name it. It's tough. It's something we struggle with for sure, but measurement is key.
So it's kind of a fascinating look at the maturity of customer experience in UX as a business component that what 10 years ago was kind of considered art and something that was really around these kind of very subjective things. And hearing you all speak about it, where you're measuring value and setting priorities using the litmus test of the business and the terminology of the business kind of shows where we've come, right? Like that this is a formal part of how we deliver things and should be treated as such.
You kind of have to say those things to continue to quash you guys are going to make it look pretty, right? You got to kind of...
Nobody say lipstick.
Box, but certainly the revenue component helps to justify what you do.
I'd say there's a slightly different angle to... we were talking about this earlier in that I think if anybody's familiar with Kate Aronowitz, she's a design partner at GV, formerly Google Ventures. About a year and a half ago, she was like, companies and designers should really be prioritizing from user, business, team, self. You can't omit any of that value. You can't just say it's only for the user and you don't have any value. What I find interesting is how a lot of the systems that are in place, getting back to sort of employee performance, can sometimes invert that equation sort of the higher up you get. And so not only do we need to speak business, we might need to employ a little bit of BJ Fogg behavioral modeling and understand the motivations and abilities of those we're working with. So what if we were to, again, use the same type of research, not just for customers, but those relationships that we work with day in, day out, to get a better understanding of where we might be able to meet in the middle. And often that's just language. Or letting a person have the last word in the room. Right?
It seems like there's a little bit of kind of Darwinism in it, right? You're still excelling in this field because you've been able to take on these attributes of understanding how it intersects with the business, and perhaps there are plenty of people out there who are not finding the same level of success by failing to connect those things. So last question before we get into some Q&A. I think, almost 20 years into the emergence of Agile as kind of the go-to methodology, and it's not that it's perfect, it's just that it's the least terrible of them for the most part. What are you guys seeing that are like really successful things about integrating design teams with Agile development teams, and what are some things that are still a big challenge or not quite figured out yet?
I'll go again. I would say that in an enterprise environment, there is no one way. Again, due to the variances in the teams that you're working with, that a hybrid approach is more valuable. I find this is a generalization, of course, that Agile tends to work well when something already exists. Agile in an enterprise environment where product budgets are set without Agile in consideration, that it's really difficult to use an Agile process to get a stakeholder to give you money. That, again, the enterprise environment, it might require a lot more data. It might require a lot more of even a waterfall-y type of approach to come up with the product requirement document or whatever is still being used internally to get the funding. Then once the funding is there and resources are being applied, Agile ends up working quite well. And I think that's the blind spot in a lot of times is just pick one methodology and it will always work. Doesn't work. We get back to our it depends consideration, and knowing where we are within that sort of cycle of events is when one method may work against another.
Yeah, and I think there's again kind of that personal component is the flavor of Agile that you have, or the kind of the hybrid model, is going to be different from organization to organization. And I think one thing that I found really successful for making that work is a program management office. I don't know if it's named different things at different companies, but working with folks that kind of have that bird's eye view of all of the different Scrum teams, what everybody's doing, all these different Agile tracks that everybody's doing. How do you pull all that together and knit it together to make sure that it's servicing the OKRs or the KPIs that the company's trying to achieve, making sure that timelines are on track and that the priorities are the right priorities, that this Scrum team over here that's waiting on this Scrum team's technology platform, that they're actually going to be able to meet at some point in the future. Program management office is huge in terms of being able to ensure that those Scrum teams are being used effectively.
Yeah, I think for us, so a little background, the Zebra in the last year has kind of doubled in size. It's gone from a pretty, small startup to a mid-sized company now, and a majority of our hires has been on what we call product management side. So every Scrum team has a product manager, as well as a dedicated design resource. Something that we struggle with is carving out the time at the beginning and the end for design. We ask a series of questions before we start to determine kind of what our design process is going to look like, how much resources we're going to dedicate to solving this problem. And yeah, I mean, for us, it's just communication. The product managers and the designers we have a Slack channel for just us. We communicate all the time. We do weekly meetings, and just making sure that we're aligned on priorities and just from a high level, kind of what we're trying to do here.
Picking back up off of you, I think, again, enterprise context, there's a big difference between a process engineer, Six Sigma, and a product manager, like in a digital space. And I think when it comes to Agile, if you go to the core manifesto, it doesn't have a lot of the stuff that then comes with a lot of these frameworks that have been commercialized and serve large consulting organizations. And it wasn't meant to be a blueprint, a step-by-step recipe, if you will. And where I see a lot of the struggles is in that process world of wanting a yes-no kind of answer. Agile was never meant to be that. And so where a lot of the fall-off or the sort of lack of real buy-in ends up being because it's fairly ambiguous. It's a framework meant to guide decisions, not necessarily dictate.
we've certainly seen the value of the program manager as a team member who actually owns a deliverable, and that would be the process by which you're delivering things, right? As opposed to an administrator or facilitator that kind of sits above the team, embed them and make them part of it, just like a UX or developer, and that seems to be pretty successful. So we'll do some Q&A real quick, and raise your hand if you have a question. I'll come to you with the microphone so that we can make sure that everybody can hear.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. This has been excellent. I had a question, circling back to something Mateo said over here. You were talking about how your team is already really well integrated with design from the top down, but you also have differentiation. You've got your design team and you've got your sales team, and you said your designers aren't salespeople; they're not insurance people, and then your insurance people at the same time aren't designers. So, what are some ways that you have worked to bridge the gap and help sell design to people that are not designers, that may not intrinsically understand the value that it holds to the company? And of course, that's open to anybody as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of goes both ways. I say it starts with communication. For larger projects, we run design sprints before we start developing anything, making sure that there's someone representing that team in that design sprint, because so many times we're designing without a lot of background knowledge on how the insurance industry got to this point and why they're asking certain questions, or, I mean, it's complicated. Like, every state's different, so like, why does this state do it differently than this state? Like, understanding that side of it is really important for us, and then for them, having them have some buy-in in the process, and it creates advocates for design is what happens. And so they go off and they explain to their team why we made this decision, why we did it this way. And so you start to build rapport, and yeah, you have people defending your decisions for you, which is nice.
Well, I think one of the best attributes of a design sprint is not the core things you get out of the sprint, but it's the overall introduction of education, if you will. At large companies, we do sometimes have the fortune of being able to resource an entire team that is like a community of practice team. USAA has that now, a wonderful leader in Aaron Hauber, who their whole purpose is to drive this maturity of, say, non-designers, the democratization of how it goes. To a selling point, to a business leader, you kind of say, we're going to use this process that used to take you 8 weeks to get just to some assumptive considerations now into a few days. As a strategy consulting group, we find it pretty useful to use the same format just to talk about vision work, right? And using the structure as a means to have a cross-partner team show up. Everybody kind of gets their own space to voice whatever their opinion is, which is important. But then using a lot of the paradigms of the sprint, using that to walk them through where at the end of the 2 days, they're going to kind of have the basis of a plan, an action plan moving out. So they are slowly introduced, but then they get that tangible thing that they need that used to take 8 weeks, right?
I did. This is perhaps more for Ryan because it speaks a little bit to the enterprise size of challenges. You talked about earlier about moving off this aspirational poster kind of thought, and how do you truly operationalize things on the scale that you have to deal with an experience-driven transformation?
In hindsight, I say my answer would be to have a very different job interview for the role. If somebody were to approach me to do that, I would want to make clear that they know what they're getting into. Because otherwise, they're going to hire a bunch of talented people who 2 years from there won't really want to stay. I think that's a problem in the market right now, is Having it doesn't equate to being good at it. And when you're talking about some of the top talent in the market, they want both. They want to be there, and they're also motivated by what they're able to do and the impact that they can have. Again, getting down to that values all the way down. You don't want that to be the top goal, they're, self-goal. My questions that I'm asking about the industry are companies that are, say, non-digitally native, large old school companies. Can design or experience-led initiatives survive a leadership regime change? What's going to happen? I don't want to mention names or companies, but what's going to happen when that huge advocate leaves? Will it survive? Will it become a service line, peripheral again? I think that's now a challenge that maybe design leaders, we've spent a lot of time getting to the table, that suddenly 2 or 3 years into being at the table, we're recognizing, goodness, we might have been solving the wrong problem here. And I think that will cycle through, right? But I think, what is it, our chart of adoption, the big D is an industry. We've seen now the McKinsey report. Does that mean that, we're going to see a little bit of a tail off, because it does mean so much rigor to other functions of the business. I'm actually more concerned about maturity in the product space. I see in the enterprise space itself, where design maturity or even development maturity is being increased, we still have lack of accountability and decision rights. We have cultures that are saying that we need trust and to drive down decisions. But I see, while that's happening, the majority, or the increased amount of small decisions that are like going all the way to the top, because it's almost like the top isn't transforming as well. And I think that we're just in the middle of that cycle. I'm still looking for evidence that while you're in it, it's actually getting the transformation that you're happening. And I think it's going to go through a couple cycles, if you will, before it actually happens.
So
maybe a little too honest on that one. Yeah.
So we probably have time for one more question, if we keep it briefish. You want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Colin Tompkins. I work for Silicon Labs. My question's around NPS. This is a concept I was recently introduced to. And how is it designed? Or could you talk a little bit about, in your experience, how a well-designed NPS is implemented, and maybe some examples of not so well-designed?
Just NPS by itself?
Yeah. How's that? Is it just a survey? That's the most.
So I think a well-designed function around measuring experience is inclusive of NPS and a whole bunch of other stuff. I think there are well-designed NPS programs that in silo maybe actually act as a detriment to what the hopes of NPS might bring. Again, like I mentioned before, I think NPS is trying to look out sort of into some assumed, behaviors down the road. I don't think I've seen a lot of NPS that actually shows just what's happened, right? So if looking to develop an NPS program, I think it's a great way for it to show up on a business scorecard, by the way. Yeah. It's a great way to show red, yellow, or green, and these simple metrics to start the communication at that C-suite level. But with great things, it comes with a lot of, dark patterns underneath, that it might become just the savior metric, right? And I don't think it's that.
Yeah, I think I think it's important for an NPS to be part of a portfolio of metrics that you're analyzing to say, are we doing the right thing, or are we doing it the right way? Because you mentioned about good design. I mean, I think for every product or for every experience, the right design is something that you have to find out for yourself. I think the things that need to go into that is avoiding things like false positives. Like a survey is typically the way that it's done, right? And when are you presenting that to the user? Is it in the midst of them trying to get something done? In that case, probably pissing them off because you've just interrupted them trying to get something done. Or if they've actually had a great experience, but they're ready to move on to the next thing, are they just kind of clicking through and saying, yeah, 10, 10, 10, it's all great, what's the kind of the truth barometer in there is hard to really measure, and the way that you design that and understand where that survey is coming in their experience, the user's experience, is a big part of that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. From my experience, it really comes down to where in the process you ask the question. If it's after they've converted, or for us, we ask in the email that we send after they've purchased a policy, like how likely are you to recommend us, or how satisfied were you with your experience, those kind of questions. But asking, don't interrupt their flow. I mean, we see it all the time. You see it in all the apps you use on your phone, and just like you're trying to get something done and it pops up and you're just like trying to get out of it. You don't care. And that's not valuable, right? Like to the designers asking the question, you're not getting the real truth there.
I'd say if you are aware of the important, say, contacts with your customers at points, do NPS across those things, because purchasing insurance is very different than like making a claim. Making a claim is very different when you have a total house destroyed versus a scratch on the bumper, right? And if you have your a claims team show up at your door, a team of 5 giving you a hug when you got a scratch on your bumper, might create the opposite effect, right? In your NPS score. So I think it's important, again, to consider it in the portfolio, like you mentioned, but it has been proven to be, I mean, if you mention that Bain created this metric and here's what I'm here to talk to you about, you'll see some ears perk and say, this isn't me, this is a well-known metric, and it's a great way to get in the door